What is up, everybody, and welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com. I'm Jacob Turner. Joining me, as he always does, is THI publisher Andrew Jones. And AJ, we are here for another edition of the UNC football show, as it's officially Boston College week for the Tar Heels as they prepare to travel up to Chestnut Hill for a noon kickoff this Saturday against the Eagles. That game will be on the CW network. Carolina currently a 3-point favorite over BC. And yeah, we're gonna, jam-packed show ahead as always. We're going to preview the game a little bit later on. We're going to talk a little bit about fans and what it's going to take for certain things to happen. And I think we're going to have some pretty interesting conversations in this one. We'll also recap the week a little bit as well. And that's AJ, that's where I want to start. You've obviously been over at the Keenan Football Center earlier this week for press conferences, players, and Mac Brown, as well as both coordinators. You can find that on our YouTube channel below as well. If you've missed those interviews, definitely go check them out. I think it helps to watch them and just kind of learn a little bit more about what's actually going on in the program. So, AJ, it seems like vibes are still pretty high in Chapel Hill. I mean, 3-game winning streak. It feels like they should be. Carolina playing a lot better football, coming off a tight, but nevertheless a win over Wake Forest. And it feels like things are kind of trending in the right direction. And it feels like almost a told you so moment for Mac Brown so far, because he's harped all season really about how he expected this team to get better as the year went on. And man, that's exactly what we're seeing. So I'm assuming vibes are still pretty high in the KFC right now.
Yeah, the vibes are very high in the KFC, but I think I sensed it was a little guarded this week because they achieved something. Mm-hmm. They're bowl eligible. And think about where they were the day Ty Lee died and they lost to Georgia Tech, or even the JMU game, but more the other one because they were 3-4. They lost. It was their fourth straight loss. To think that they would be here so quickly, being bowl eligible, wasn't on anybody's mind for the most part. So they've achieved something, but I also think they understand they haven't played world beaters and they don't have world beaters left, but they played very well. And I think the focus is on how they've played a lot more than what the results are, because earlier they were rattled by the results. And I think it shook them to the point where they just didn't play connected football on so many levels. Now they are, especially on the defensive side of the ball. They're far more connected. The communication's a lot better. Nobody's trying to do someone else's job. They have simplified the you-know-what out of stuff, and they're a lot better. They have 11 missed tackles in the last 3 games combined. They had 31 combined in the Pitt-Georgia Tech games. So they're a much cleaner team in so many ways now than they were. They know that. I think the confidence is high, but I also just kind of sense like, okay, you've achieved something here. We've seen this program so often reach a point where, okay, we did something. And then something bad happens and they don't back it up. They have to back it up now. And this is going to be a weird place to have to go to try to back it up, because it'll be there. And Mac made a great point Monday. They practice in the mornings. They practice when it's cold. So it'll be cold. It'll be cold when they go out and start doing warm-ups. It'll warm up during the day, but it'll probably be in the 30s when they go out and do warm-ups because it's a noon game. We have no idea what kind of crowd they're going to have. BC's had pretty good crowds this year. There's a lot of optimism about Bill O'Brien, and that early win at Florida State, I think, helped the fan base a lot. Yeah. But there may not be a great crowd for this one because BC's now 5-5. They've lost 4 out of 5. Castellanos is gone. He's in the portal, and they're just sort of feeling their way around. I think Bill O'Brien taking over a program and installing a lot of new stuff is starting to show the wear and tear on that. So I'm not so sure they're going to have a great crowd on Saturday. So Carolina might have to generate some of its own energy in a place they're not familiar with playing. Marcus Allen told us on Tuesday he's excited to go up there because he's never been to Boston. He's never been to that stadium. He wants to see what it's like. So there'll be a lot of newness for a lot of these guys. And I just think that it sets up that if they're not mentally tough and completely dialed in, this is a very, very dangerous game for them, especially coming off a 6 win and they're bowl eligible. And there are some people finally saying attaboy. These guys haven't had an attaboy in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So how do they handle all that? It's an older team. It's a mature team. It's a team that handled all that, came through the storm, so to speak, and came out on the other side really well. So this is the next obstacle. I didn't see Wake as an obstacle. I saw Wake as just show up, play good football, you're going to win.
Mm-hmm.
This, they need to, in order, long before they get on the field at Alumni Stadium, they've got to be mentally sharp. They got to be mentally sharp when they get on the plane Friday. They got to be mentally sharp when they get up for pregame meal Saturday morning. So much of what happens on the field Saturday afternoon will be determined long before Saturday afternoon. And I think that that is the question mark going in. I'm not saying that they won't handle it. I'm not suspicious whether or not they will. But it's something that the program needs to show, because in November, they've had these moments where they just weren't ready to go.
Yeah.
So for Mac to be validated and vindicated by what he's been saying, this is the game to do it. Worry about NC State later. This is the game to do it because it's such a dangerous game on so many fronts.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, man. I think these next two games are, especially over the last few weeks, when you look at the back end of Carolina's schedule, I think we even talked about it maybe a little bit earlier in their season as well. But because of the state rivalry, because of how Carolina's fared against State in recent years as well, and this game going up to BC against a physical a team under a new coach in Bill O'Brien, it's a physical team. I know Castellanos being gone kind of, maybe gives Carolina a little bit more of an advantage than they would have had a few weeks ago, but still, I look at these two games as the two areas and the two games where you kind of circled on the on the schedule and say you could easily see slip-ups there for different reasons. So I think this is going to be a test for North Carolina. We'll talk about Boston College a little bit later, because I do think, again, you dive into it, very, very beatable team. You mentioned losing 4 out of the last 5, 2-4 in ACC play. This is also a very winnable game. But it also, not that any game, you have to show up for every single game to win in the ACC play. But this is a game where maybe if you're not at your A game, maybe if, certain things aren't clicking in all cylinders, maybe if we see the throwing struggles and passing game struggles that we saw last weekend against Wake Forest, if that continues against Boston College, maybe we're having a different conversation on Saturday afternoon. So I think these two games coming up would be great for Carolina to finish 8-4. But I do think they're also very tricky for different reasons. And I don't think it's as straightforward as, Carolina just shows up and plays well against Boston College and they win. I think they're going to really have to play a complete game against Boston College to go out there and come home with the victory on Saturday. So I'm looking forward to it. It's an intriguing matchup to me for a lot of different reasons, but I do think Carolina should ultimately win the game. Again, we'll dive into that a little bit later.
If they leave points on the field and have end of half poor clock management like we saw again Saturday against Wake, they could lose both games for sure. Mm-hmm. These two games are far more challenging going in than any of the 3 that they've won on this win streak.
Yeah.
Virginia, they're not very good. They're 5-5. I'd say BC's a better 5-5 than UVA is. Florida State is an absolute train wreck.
Disaster.
And Wake Forest is not very good, obviously. When they've played really good teams, they've gotten absolutely smoked. Mm-hmm. They're just not a very good team. And Carolina didn't pull away in that game, should have pulled away. So we'll see. But these last two are big. I think these last two, one of the topics we'll have a little bit later at some point in the show, I think these last two could rally the base a little bit more and get people a little bit more excited. I think a lot of people are sitting there, you've won 3 in a row, and you're going to BC, they're not very good, but you know who's there at the end of the year. And by the way, State's play a little bit better of late too. Yeah. And I would suspect that by the time the Wolfpack roll into Kenan Stadium, the Wolfpack will be at its best this season because Doran's teams get better. Yeah.
I think you're 100% right. Especially with a quarterback situation like that they've had with CJ Bailey.
Well, they're settled now. They're pretty comfortable with what they have.
Yeah, 100%. So I do think that State game, it's always tricky, but when you look at Carolina and how they played in the last 3 years against the State, I don't think anybody's necessarily going to.
Well, it's all been self-destructive too. That's the thing.
That's the problem. Yeah, that's the problem.
I think that's actually why it's an easy sell to the kids.
Oh yeah,
you show them film and say, "Here's where we self-destruct in this game. Here's where we did it in this game. Here's where we did it in this game," and they're self-destruction away from having won those games.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't do it.
I think this team's a little bit less self-destructive than some of the previous teams. I think it's a higher IQ football team. It's a more mature team. So projecting forward, I know we have another week. We have next week to do do that show. But I think self-destruction is something that can hurt them this weekend too.
Oh, yeah.
So don't get punts blocked. They fumbled a few times this past weekend, and Jacoby has not thrown an interception since the Duke game. So they got to avoid that kind of stuff. That's how you lose up there. You get penalties, you fumble a kickoff.
Missed field goals. We saw that last week.
Yeah, Noah Burnett's not in the final 20 in the Lou Groza Award because he's not had a great year. He's missed 5 field goals now. Last year he was 19 for 20. He was one of the best kickers in college football. He missed a 34-yarder the other day.
I know, uncharacteristic. Just
That's totally uncharacteristic. So I would think you might see him go for a 4th down. By the way, speaking about field goals, Boston College has attempted 2 field goals this year.
It's crazy.
1 for 2. So if they're going to go for it a lot. They get into that certain spot in the field, they're just going to go for it. They're going to be aggressive. So what if they convert some of those? And they don't kick field goals. They end up getting a couple touchdowns where other teams may have settled for field goals, and then you have some self-destruction. That's how you lose this game, and that's how you lose to State the week after.
Yeah, no, Carolina's a lot of positive signs, a lot of things they're doing well. I think there was some things that they would like to have done better against Wake Forest that would have resulted maybe in a little bit more of a convincing win, for lack of a better word. But again, the team's winning, and we always say it, AJ. It's one of my favorite sayings of all time because I think it's one of the most truest sayings of all time. Winning solves everything, and particularly with the fan base. No one really cares how you're playing and performing and doing what. They do to an extent, fans do. But at the end of the day, if you're putting W's in the win column, how you're doing it really doesn't matter that much to fans. It's the fact that, okay, we keep winning. So I think that's the main thing Carolina needs to keep focusing on is, hey, 2 more games to close out this season. And also, AJ, we've talked about it a little bit here, 2 more games to kind of shed that stigma that's been with this program the last few years. AJ, a team that when prosperity comes and you start doing things well and the end of the season comes, you fall off a cliff and you invent ways to lose games in a lot of ways like we've seen over the last couple of years. Winning these next 2 games and even potentially winning a bowl game, which I think would be big for Mac Brown because he hasn't done a lot of that since he's come back to North Carolina, would be huge for not only, I think, this team, but the program moving forward and the vibe around the program from the fan base moving forward, which I want to talk about in a second because I do find that a little bit interesting still. So massive opportunities for North Carolina to kind of, again, shed some of that negative stigma that's just followed this program around, and rightly so, over the last 3 seasons. So, yeah, very important game this week.
Let me comment on what you said about winning solves everything and people just want wins. I look at the world a little bit differently, as do you to a degree. I look at the world differently where I like to isolate each game and how they play. I look for carryover. I look for all kinds of things, right?
Yeah, the way we try to analyze stuff. Yeah.
There's the old popcorn trail on the Brady Bunch when they went into the cave. I have a popcorn trail with 1,000 different things each week. And I hope that makes sense.
No, I get what you're saying.
They had the 2 blowouts. They come out of the first open date and they have a couple blowouts. You're like, okay, this is like they're popping in all kinds of ways. And then the Wake Forest game out of the second bye week, it was a game that they would have lost in October, especially late September, early October. I asked Mac afterward, or maybe it was Monday. I don't know how this stuff piles up during the overlap. I asked him, I said, is this basically a game you would have lost before, but you won it now? He said yes. And I think that that's what makes the Wake game more encouraging in some ways than the Virginia and Florida State games. In part, I think Wake's certainly better than Florida State. And I don't know, a Dave Clawson team in November should be more difficult to beat than what UVA's been. No. So certainly you have to prepare, and they're going to have you scouted. And I think Wake did have them scouted really well, except the fake punt. They had no idea Copenhagen was on the field, which is mind-boggling. But anyway, and we talked to Copenhagen about that on Tuesday. But they found a way to win. I know that Omarion went crazy, but kudos to the staff for giving him the ball 40 times. He had
Whatever it takes, man.
35 carries. It's funny. Some people are like, they need to give Omarion the ball more. Dude, he had it 40 times.
Yeah, you can't really touch it anymore, can you?
They ran 77 plays. He had 40 touches.
It's insane.
So that's pretty good. That's a heavy load, but I think you're going to see more of that the rest of the way. They only got him for a couple more games. I don't anticipate him coming back next year unless they can come up with an incredible NIL package, and they need to spend NIL money on defensive linemen next year.
Yeah,
because they're going to have to replenish through the portal. They need 4 probably in the portal, so it's going to be a pretty hefty price.
Mm-hmm.
So Omarion's got 2 more. Don't be surprised if he gets 40 touches again this weekend. And that's what I like that they did, because while I did question not giving him the ball, Mac did too. Mac said he yelled at Chip Lindsey about not giving Omarion the ball when he got the 2 sacks. When Jacoby had the 2 sacks in the first half, and I think it was the drive where they had the fake punt. And you just give him the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Just give it to him. He's going to score. Give it to him.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't. And then, but they did later. And I think you'll see that. I don't think you're going to see any indecision this weekend. If there was something that needed to be hammered down with an exclamation mark, I think it's when you're inside the 7-yard line, 6-yard line, give Omarion the ball.
100%.
Just give him the ball. You can tell BC, Omarion's running over Aiden Banfield.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're going to have a hard 2 count. He's going to run over Aiden Banfield. The linebacker's going to block, or the tight end's going to block down, kick the defensive end out. The tackle's going to come down and hit linebacker, something like that. Banfield's going to block straight ahead, and Omarion's going over that hole, and BC's going to say, okay, got it. And Omarion's going to go to the hole and drag somebody in the end zone.
Mm-hmm.
It's really simple stuff. He makes it simple. Sometimes coaches, and I'm not saying Chip Lindsey does this. In fact, I don't think he does at all. But a lot of offensive coordinators want to show the world how deep the playbook is.
Yeah, it's not
They
necessary.
want to show them how many gadgets are in that bag.
Mm-hmm.
Gadgets don't win football games.
Mm-hmm.
You've got an Omarion Hampton, just boom. And they ended up doing that last week, and they got the win because of it, because Jacoby was off. And so Omarion had 40 touches. So I think that's what you'll see the next 2 weeks. And if he gets 40 touches in each of the next 2 games, they will win those 2 games. I guarantee it.
100%. Real quickly, too, what do you make of Criswell? Because he was off last week, and his first game we've seen him, I think, off in quite a while, maybe since that first bye week. I thought Mac's answer, because Mac was asked about it, and his answer, his first answer to it was the exact thing that my mind was thinking, as being someone who was there watching that game, is I just didn't think Carolina protected him well at times on Saturday. I thought he was under pressure a lot. I know the fumble, the one that hits off Omarion Hampton, that's an unfortunate one. And I know Mac talked about can kind of happen sometimes with these RPOs and stuff like that. And so I don't put too much blame. It's an unfortunate situation. I don't put too much blame on for that. But I remember during the game on Saturday, turning to some people I was sitting around and saying, man, Criswell looks off today, but I put a lot of that down to how the O-line played, because I just thought there was times where there was a couple instances, AJ, where the pocket was so tight that he couldn't even, it was almost hard for him to put his arm back to throw the ball, because he had 4 defenders surrounding him and no linemen trying to block him and keep it off of him. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because maybe it's just a fluke. Maybe it's just one of those games, but I didn't think the O-line helped him out much in that game. And I also thought there was a lot of instances too during the game where Criswell maybe had some time to throw, which wasn't necessarily a very prominent thing last Saturday. I thought there was a lot of times where he didn't have a lot of ball to throw, but even some of those instances where he was protected relatively well, you're kind of looking downfield and being like, I don't really see anybody open. So I don't think it was just necessarily him having an off game. I think there's outside factors that contributed to that. But do you just see it as potentially a fluke, or is it maybe, let's see what happens on Saturday? If he doesn't play well again on Saturday for different reasons, and maybe it becomes a little bit more of a concern. How do you look at the Criswell situation right now? I
asked him Tuesday if getting sacked 4 times in the first quarter just threw him off for the night. And he kind of said, yeah.
It's understandable, too.
He hadn't been hit a whole lot. I mean, he's been hit when he run the ball. He hadn't been hit back there. They protected him well. And he's gotten so much better at knowing when to move, when not to move. He's pretty good at staying in the pocket. His dad's a quarterback guru, so he's learned a lot about that. They talk every Sunday. His dad gives him pointers and notes certain parts of a film. Go look at that. So he's got 3 quarterback coaches.
That's not bad, is it?
His dad, who, by the way, his dad's high school team in Arkansas is undefeated. Elkins High School is undefeated still. one of the best teams in the state. He's got Chip Lindsey. By the way, he's got the ultimate quarterback guru in modern times in Clyde Christensen. Mm-hmm. So I do think basically what he said was getting hit 4 times in the first quarter kind of threw him off. And passing the ball is a skill. Playing quarterback's a skill. Sometimes the skill is off, period.
Yeah.
Sometimes Michael Jordan went 6 for 20. Mm-hmm. Right? So the great Shohei Ohtani, look at what he hit in the World Series. Mm-hmm. Not every great player, and I'm not saying Jacoby's great, is always great. The skill, sometimes, the skills ebb and flow. So that's kind of what I chalk it up to. We'll see this weekend. I think Jacoby is I think that now that he's had 7 starts, he feels like QB1. He walks around like QB1. So this will be an interesting week for him to respond to a personal slide, like downslide, if you will. Yeah. Because previously he was getting better each week. Even if the numbers weren't phenomenal, he was getting better each week as far as when to get rid of the ball, not wasting throws, not taking chances, getting a little bit more when he takes off, that kind of stuff. The communication with the offensive line, when they're running more RPOs now than they did earlier. So the decisions he's making with those, yes, made progress there. This was a little bit of a dip, so it'll be interesting to see how he responds. And it also will be interesting to see if Chip has him throw the ball some early in the game Saturday to kind of get him in a little bit of a groove, to kind of disconnect from the Wake Forest game.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I didn't take too much away from it. I'm like, oh, this is not a good sign. I just thought, to me, the O-line protection, especially in the first half, just wasn't great. And again, with a quarterback, you got to give him time to throw the ball. And again, I thought there were a lot of instances too where even going back and watching the game, there just wasn't really anybody open, even when he had time to throw. And that the wide receivers have to take blame for that. It feels like the quarterback always is to blame when they get sacked, or, oh, they held the ball too long and stuff like that, or when they, maybe have to throw the ball away. But there are instances where, and I thought there were quite a few against Wake Forest, where I just didn't really see a lot of guys open for him to throw the ball to in the first place. So, I don't know.
When he got sacked inside the 10, the first one was as much Omarion's fault as anybody else's.
Yeah.
Trey Green got clobbered on social media for it, and he was blown by, but Omarion didn't pick it up. They were showing a blitz, and I think Omarion went to the left of Jacoby behind Banfield and Howard Sampson. I think he went there to pick up the blitz because they showed the blitz, but it actually came from over here.
Yeah, the missed assignment.
And he missed that. So, Trey Green got blitzed, literally. But Omarion should have been there to pick that up.
Yeah, sometimes
he committed too soon.
Yeah.
He committed to the eye candy a little bit. So, look, it happens. Yeah. They still won the game. To have, and they haven't given up a lot of sacks. The offensive line's come along pretty well.
Yeah, they've improved. They have improved.
They haven't given up a lot of sacks this year, and to do that with 3 different quarterbacks and have to adjust. And trust me, if you don't know, when you're an offensive line, you work in sync with the quarterback, and part of this team's slower development process was the fact that Connor is a completely different type of player than Jacoby. So they were trying to get comfortable with Connor, and then all of a sudden Jacoby comes in and everything changes as far as how you block, knowing where your quarterback is, knowing how your quarterback moves, how much they move, their cadence, their communication with the center, and all that kind of stuff. It takes time. It takes time. So I suspect he'll be okay. And quite frankly, if he's okay and Omarion gets 40 touches,
it doesn't really matter.
They should win each of the last 2 games.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great way to kind of look at it. Yeah, I'm interested to see how he plays against on Saturday, and I'm also interested to see how the O-line plays on Saturday as well, because we'll talk about it a little bit later, because I do think this is it's a decent defense, but they have a really, really good player on that defensive line that we'll talk about a little bit later, one of the best in the ACC, so Carolina's going to have to be keyed in on him for sure. But AJ, before we move into the BC preview, real quickly, I want to talk about this was a topic of conversation for me on Saturday after the game and almost the fourth quarter. And it was a topic of conversation that we have had a little bit off camera as well, because I found it interesting. And it goes without. I mean, I think most people know this, especially at the game. Maybe you're one of the people who left or one of the people who stayed to the end. But I found it interesting that it was a tight game going into the fourth quarter, and I remember turning to the people sitting around me, including my dad, and being like, "Man, this place is kind of emptying out. Like it was a really good crowd for a big portion of it, and then the fourth quarter kind of comes around and people start leaving. I get it's a night game, it's a late game, and people have to drive home, and it's cold. I understand that. Not trying to sit here and bash any of the fans for it. I don't agree with it. I've always said if we go to a game, we stay to the end. That's just what we've always done since I was a kid. We don't leave games early, but I understand that different circumstances and different situations may lead to people having to leave at certain times. But I don't really want to sit here and question the fans or bash the fans for it. I don't think it's a great look when you look at how this team's been playing recently, but that's not what I want to talk about. I think the question that I was discussing with people after the game and with you off camera is it was more of a question of what is it going to take for fans or for people, whether it's under Mac Brown or under another coach, to have a full house for a night game like we in a fourth quarter, like the Wake Forest game. Again, primetime ACC network game. I know Wake Forest isn't great, but this is people always complain about noon games and, afternoon games. We want a night game. We want that. And you finally get it. And the fourth quarter crowd is just, the place is like, half full compared to what it was, at kickoff. Cause again, I thought it was a really good crowd for most of it. And for me, it's a tough one to answer, because I've always said that with this year, I think a lot of fans checked out after the Duke game. I firmly believe that, and I still stick by that, because I think our traffic, and we've talked about this a lot recently, and when it comes to football content and attendances at Keenan and all that kind of stuff, even social media stuff and message board stuff, it's just, for me, it hasn't been the same since really that Duke game. Maybe you could even make a case for the JMU game, which understandable with how that went down, but the fact of the matter is the team's playing well. They've won 3 in a row. There are a lot of reasons to be optimistic, but it doesn't necessarily feel like maybe that's transferred to certain portions of the fan base. So I don't necessarily know if I have an answer to the question of what it's going to take. I don't know because even you mentioned, you brought up a great point off camera of just go look at the Duke game last year. I mean, it was a great crowd at the end of the game. We've seen that under Mac in recent times, but it feels like this year, the Wake Forest game, with how things, it just wasn't. I found it surprising that people were leaving in the fourth quarter. Personally, it was a bit of a surprise to me based on what we've seen. And maybe it shouldn't be, because how, like I said, I think a big portion of the fan base, or a certain portion of the fan base, is checked out a little bit from how things went earlier in the season. So maybe this is a question we can't really answer because it's kind of a TBD, and maybe there isn't an easy answer to it, but what do you think it would take? And maybe this is a question we have to pose to the fans a little bit. We want to hear from you guys of what would it take, and what is it going to take for people to maybe buy in more and stick around late in those games like we didn't see on Saturday night? Because I don't necessarily know why people started leaving. I almost chalk it, well, it's a late game, some people have to drive a couple hours home. Maybe it was that, but AJ, we haven't seen that in the past. Just we've seen night games where the crowd was great from minute 1 to the end, but it was almost like people in the fourth quarter were like, this is a tight game, and you see people leaving, a lot of people leaving, and I just found that a little bit surprising. So what is your thoughts on that? I'm not trying to bash the fans or anything, but I think it's worth having a conversation about,
At halftime, I go to the back of the press box, and sometimes I used to do it more than I do it. For some reason, I just felt like I needed to do it with this game. I look out the window, and that's where the entrance on the side where the hospital is.
One of the main entrances, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And people were filing out of the stadium like it was a fire drill.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't get it.
It's halftime of a 10-3 game. Mm-hmm. Couple thoughts. One, the ACC network has got to ditch the 8 o'clock game.
Oh, God. I'm glad you said that, man.
They got to move it to like 7:20.
It's a horrible slot.
7:20. They don't need the whole studio show out there. They really don't. They don't. 8 o'clock is terrible. It was 1:30 when we started doing the 3 things.
Yeah, I mean the game didn't even end.
A lot of it doesn't make sense. It's bad for fans. If that game starts now, I'm figuring it starts at 7:20. It's probably not going to make a huge difference with the crowd because it was chilly. I was actually walking, excuse me, I was walking on the concourse before the game because my brother and my wife's son were there. And I went to go find Bruce and his wife. I always thought see them before every game. And there were a lot of people, a lot of women were dressed like it's late September, early October, but with a coat on.
It's chilly.
One woman walked by, had the boots and everything. She's dressing like she's 25, and she's a lot older than 25. And I figured she's not staying for 4 quarters.
Yeah, she's not dressed.
And I'm looking around saying a lot of these people are not staying for 4 quarters. They are not dressed to sit in this stuff for 3.5 hours. So I get it. It's easy for me sitting in a 72-degree press box. Mm-hmm. With all the comforts of being in a press box, it's very easy for me to say, why the heck would someone leave? It's the kind of cold that if you're out there for 20 or 30 minutes, you're okay. But if you're sitting out there for a couple hours, it just kind of seeps in and gets into the bones.
Yeah. I was out there, and it was, I was sitting in the stands, and I was comfortable because I dressed for it, but I can understand why it wasn't warm. Let's put it that way. It was one of the colder games that, probably the coldest game.
Yeah, I just think that it was not an entertaining football game.
Yeah, it really wasn't. I get that too.
There were flags, there were blown calls. There was not a lot of stuff to the air. It was Omarion. So fans should maybe appreciate what they have, because I did a drop that we're running Thursday. Is that the Omarion drop? We're talking about, asking a question. Is he the best running back in Carolina history?
Yeah, it's a fair question.
Carolina fans, I know that they used to show up to watch Famous Amos and those guys, so you should probably want to watch Omarion, but
they did see a good defensive performance, and that's something
they did
crying out for years.
And they saw win. So the question you asked is, what's it going to take? I think with some people, it's going to take a coaching change.
Agreed.
I believe that a healthy percentage of the fan base jumped off at 70 to 50, and nothing can bring them back on.
Completely agree. And the Duke game and Georgia Tech didn't help.
A lot of the ones that said, okay, God, that was just an awful look. I don't know, but hey, we got Duke this week, 20-0, and they lose. I think that Mac lost more than half the fan base those 2 weeks, and it wasn't just those 2 weeks. The ground was unstable going in because of the culmination the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. And not doing more with Sam and Drake. I mean, I hear it all the time. I'm not speaking for myself. I'm speaking for what we hear all the time. The irony is, through Jacoby's first 6 starts, he had the same numbers Drake had last year in his last 6 starts. Mm-hmm. Basically the same numbers. So I think it will take a coaching change, or go up and beat BC 34-6, beat State 35-0, and then end up playing a team with a good name in the bowl game. Not like a Kansas State, who doesn't have a great name, even though it should, because it's been a really good program this century. Mm-hmm. But playing, who would be a better name than Kansas State in the Big 12, as an example? What would be a better name than them that would probably go to a bowl? I'm not sure there is anybody.
I think it probably would be Kansas State, yeah.
It probably would be Kansas State. But let's say they get to play Michigan instead of Kansas State. Kansas State's a better team than Michigan. But if they played Michigan in a Gator Bowl, like if they played a 6-6 Michigan in some bowl game, the Champ Sports Bowl, wherever they at the Pop-Tart thing, I don't know what it is now. If they played a 6-6 Michigan as opposed to a 9-3 Kansas State, and they waxed Michigan, that would generate a lot more fan enthusiasm than waxing a good Kansas State team.
Absolutely.
So I think that's what it would take, just to get people nudging their way back on Mac's side.
Yeah.
I think a lot of fan base, they bugged out. I think a lot of people have gone to the home games recently as an obligation.
Yeah.
And if you're going as an obligation and not to root for your team to get a hard fought win, you're going to leave at halftime. You're going to leave in the third quarter when you're cold. You're not going to sit through the cold. Mm-hmm. People that are more passionate, that have a bigger picture view, and like, hey, this is my team. I got to support them. They're playing okay. Let's support these kids. They've been through a lot. They're the ones that stick it through 4 quarters.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, it's fascinating to me because I had an engagement dinner for a buddy of mine on Saturday, so I didn't end up getting. We park in the Bowls lot when I go to the game with my dad and sit in the stands. He has a parking pass in the Bowls lot, so we usually get there a few hours before the game, if not 3 or 4 hours to go to Franklin Street and get some food if I'm going to the game with him. But we didn't end up getting there until about 7:15, which is late for us. and the Bowls lot was full. There's a lot of tailgaters. We had to park in the parking deck over there, which isn't uncommon at all, but it was a full Bowls lot. And I say this to say is we stayed till the end, and we were probably getting to the car about 11:45, game ended about 11:30, maybe a little bit later. And AJ, the Bowls lot was like empty. And it was weird because it wasn't like there was just people sitting in traffic. There just was not a lot of cars there anymore. And that is the main tailgating lot for Carolina football. So a lot of the diehards or a lot of the people that season ticket holders will have a parking space in there. Yeah. So for me, that was just an example of what we're talking about here of, we didn't stick around after the game for 30 minutes to an hour. We left pretty much 5 minutes after the final whistle blew, and we get to the Bowls lot 15 minutes later and there's like nobody there. And I thought that was just a very interesting and kind of a summation of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. I thought the crowd was good.
I really do.
Jacob, I thought the crowd was pretty good at the start of the game, but I also wonder how much of Saturday night was a social event.
That's a good point.
And everybody, I've had enough. It's time to go home.
Well, that's why I find the conversation interesting, because I thought the crowd was good at the beginning. So I find it interesting that in a tight game in the fourth quarter, people just, and even at halftime, people just start leaving. And I don't know. I don't think it's a great look, but I also understand it because I just feel like a lot of people are very apathetic about the program. Yeah.
It's a terrible look. And that's where, the SEC gets so much positive attention just for existing without even having to do anything. It's wild how one of Texas's good wins was listed as at Vanderbilt. And Vanderbilt lost to Georgia State. And no one ever talks about that. Ever.
No.
Ever. No, when Kentucky wins at Ole Miss, that's the deep SEC.
Mm-hmm.
When Georgia Tech beats Miami, well, Miami's not that good. I just, part of it's because of the crowds. Part of it's because of the atmosphere. Go look at the attendances in the ACC stadium Saturday, and then look at the SEC stadiums. Stanford listed 18,000 with Louisville in town, a ranked team, a program that produced a Heisman Trophy winner not that long ago. And there's 18,000 people.
Stanford won.
There were not 18,000 people there.
Stanford won. Yeah, it's crazy.
No, I mean, it was brutal. It looked like a crowd after a 1 a.m. East Coast American League game after a 3-hour rain delay.
Yeah, like a spring game. Like a spring game or something.
Not even a spring game. It was brutal. Cal had 33,000 for Syracuse in town. That's what they listed, 33,000. There were no ACC stadiums that were at capacity except SMU, but their capacity is 32,000.
And they're pretty good this year too, so it's understandable.
And they're very good this year. They're going to win the ACC, which no G5 has ever gone up and won that league. They already have the most wins of a G5 going to a power league ever.
I know. They've been good 13 in the country right now.
And people look at that as an indictment on the league. So what I'm saying is SEC fans aren't going to leave that game. Look at Florida. Florida fans want Billy Napier fired. And that place is full, and they're singing Tom Petty at the end of the third quarter.
It's the culture, yeah, man. It's just
that's part of what's missing. So when people say Mac's not recruiting, well, how is he going to get kids to want to play there when it's a tie game or it's a one touchdown game in the fourth quarter and the place is 80% empty?
I'm glad you said that. How's he going to
get kids to go there when there's no NIL money? Because this translates.
Oh, of
People
course.
Who stay might give they need to go buy 4 defensive linemen in the portal here in a month. So they also have to keep guys. Like there's a concern they can keep a guy like Amari Campbell or Aiden Manfield. They got to pay him to keep them. They got to go get guys. People are going to complain, whoever the coach is next year, Mac or whoever, and I throw that out because it doesn't matter who the coach is going to be if you have to go out and get bargain basement defensive linemen and then see if Ted Monachino could coach them up.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that.
So the fans are more a part of the program now than they've ever been. Ever. So we talk to the recruits. We know what they say about the atmosphere. Sometimes they say stuff off the record. And when there's 80% empty and it's a 1 touchdown game and Omarion's having a career night, what do you think a kid's going to think? And then next week the kid will go down to Florida, and Florida's got a losing record, and they're singing, and there's 84,000 people singing Tom Petty at the end of the third quarter. Where do you think they're going to be more interested in going?
It's all connected so much more than it ever was.
All
now.
Connected. You're 100% right. It's all connected. So the people who are like the guy that tweeted us, I'm not going to wear my Carolina hat until Mac Brown's gone.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, you're showing him. But that's stupid.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. I don't. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. I'm glad you said the recruiting thing too. We'll move on to BC in a second, but the reason I'm glad you said it is because that was actually one of the things that I kind of noticed, because we were staying there after the game in Carolina. They all go to the end zone and line up and do the alma mater song and everything like that. And there was a line of recruits kind of standing parallel to him. And mind you, I'm exaggerating this to make a point. There's 15 people in the crowd at this point. But I remember in that moment looking and being like, if I'm one of those recruits right there, and this team's just won 3 in a row, and Hampton's had this massive game, and it's this nighttime, primetime ACC network game. I know it's against a bad Wake Forest team. It's not a very exciting program to play on a Saturday night. It was the 111th
meeting. They've been playing them forever, so that should make it important.
I thought about the recruit standing there, and I'm like, man, if I'm a recruit, like you just said, and I got a scheduled visit to an SEC program or something coming up soon, there is no comparison, and people are going to recruits will remember that. So again, I'm not trying to sit here and bash fans and say, you guys that have come to games. I've always been it's easy for us to say in the media, but I think the point that some people miss with someone like me is I've been going to Carolina. My dad's had season tickets for 15 years at this point. I've been going to Carolina games long before I started working for Tar Heel Illustrated. So I feel like I can speak on this a little bit more because I'm someone who, before they were in the media, was in the crowd, and even I've sat in the crowd for every game this year because I enjoyed doing it. But I always tell people there's 6 or 7 home games a year. Just go to the thing. And especially when the team's winning. If the team's 0-6 or 1-7, I can understand why you would not want to go watch that crap product. But with how this team's developed and gotten better, and Hampton being one of the best running backs in Carolina history, making a case for the best, there's a lot of things. Defense playing well against Wake Forest. I thought that was one of the best defensive performances I've seen in Keenan in a long time, with takeaways and flying around the field and making plays and kind of keeping Carolina in it with how poor the offense was playing. It's just not a great look when you see people leaving at halftime in the beginning of the fourth quarter. I personally don't get it because we never leave games early when I was going. It's just not something we do, no matter how bad the team is. So I don't know. I just thought it was worth bringing up, but I don't want to come on. I don't want it to sound like we're on here.
No, I understand. The question is, what will it take?
And I don't know if I have an answer to that.
The thing is, for the people who say, well, I'm going to show Mac by not showing up, well, there are ramifications.
Yeah.
And if you're a diehard and you truly care and you want to be better, there are ramifications. The list that we run the visitors list every Thursday. And this was the biggest list they had all season. Yeah. We had 43 names on it, and there were probably 70 kids that came.
A lot of kids, yeah.
A lot of them are important players. A lot of them are important targets. A lot of them are 2026 targets. Most of 25s, they've already made up their mind. The 2026s have not, for the most part. And they have some kids that love Carolina. I can tell you right now, I'm not going to name any names, but we talked to them. There's some really important prospects that absolutely love everything about the program, but they haven't committed yet. Mm-hmm. Because there's probably 1 or 2 things that maybe they don't care for as much that they're either not going to talk about or they say off the record. And I can assure you that crowd resonated. If you're recruiting against Carolina, just show a clip to a kid. Why would you go there? They don't care.
It's so easy. Yeah.
So what will it take? Going back to your question, I think it would take closing this year with 3 routes or 2 routes and beating State, and then opening up 5-6-0 next year, because they have some tough games early on, so they may actually have to beat some people. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's what it takes. I think in some cases it will take a new coach. A new coach who sell them a bill of goods to get them in there quickly, and most people will be, well, seeing is believing. I could see them getting, Harvey Schmedlap, some up-and-comer, and they're 4-0 next year, and no one will believe because, A, they can't remember the coach's name, don't know how to spell it, and we've been 4-0 before it doesn't mean anything. It would be like a same cycle of stuff.
It's what it feels like to me. Yeah. I don't. So, that's why I think the question's interesting because I don't really have an answer for it. I don't really know.
I think it probably will require a new coach as much as anything else, and that's not. And I'm not pitching for that.
No.
It's just my read on the situation. I think that's unfortunate because who the hell are you going to get?
I completely agree.
Here's the thing, and going back to this, in 17 and 18, when Larry's teams were battered, and the 17 team lost 19 guys for the season with injuries, and they were just awful.
Yeah, just bad.
Those two teams were awful. Larry had gone the wrong direction, painted himself, put himself in a corner and didn't come out. He hurt himself a lot that last year. And most fans kept saying, I just want to win 8 or 9 games and beat State every once in a while. Mm-hmm. Well, the guy they have in there now is doing that. If they beat State in 2 weeks, he will have done exactly that. 3-3 against State, and he'll have 9, 8, and 8 with wins. And if you go back to the Orange Bowl year, they had 8 and 8. They had one fewer game on the schedule. So other than 21, they played about the way people want them to play, or at least said, look, they'll be happy with that. So that's why I think at this point, the lack of recognition of that tells me that most people just simply would prefer a different leadership in the program. Mm-hmm. I don't agree with that just yet. I can understand why some people are a little bit concerned or upset. I get that. But at the same time, since he left the first time, you've had Torbush, train wreck, Bunning, train wreck, Butch Davis, crook, cheater, and still didn't win more than 8 games. You had Everett Withers for a year, that disaster interim coach season, which was awful for the program. And then Larry did some nice things, but ended up terribly. Who are you going to get? Mm-hmm. North Carolina is not the same job it was when Mac took over. And when Mac took over, it was still a great job. It really was. It was just an underachieving job. But it's changed. Look at the crowd the other night. People gone. Look at NIL. Look at all that stuff. It's changed.
Absolutely.
Not as good a job as it was when Mac took over. They're probably looking at getting some coordinator from Georgia or wherever. And people might say, oh, wow, that's great. That doesn't mean it's going to work out. Remember how everybody loved Brett Venables?
Ooh,
how's he done in Oklahoma?
Yeah, it's been a train wreck.
How's he done in Oklahoma? Carolina fans would love to have had him a few years ago.
Yeah.
And Oklahoma is going to quickly become the Nebraska of the SEC.
You bring a new coach in, assistant or coordinator or something like that, and let's say he starts the year 2-4 next year. I mean, people will stop showing up then. I mean, I don't think that's why I think it's interesting is like, I don't really know what it's going to take unless, and this is the conversation I have with my dad of like, is it just Carolina just has to win every game over the next year and then people will kind of get back on track?
5 straight national championships.
I mean, come on, guys. You know what I mean?
And then they'll get bored.
That's the thing. It's like, it'll be something we'll just have to kind of watch and see, because if Carolina wins out and maybe Max sticks around for another year or two, like it'll be very interesting and a talking point early next year to see what is the vibe kind of like amongst fans. Cause I don't think it would be that much different than this year. Even if Carolina wins out, I really don't.
If they win the next 2 and then win the bowl game, that will be the best record of Mac Part 2.
And I don't think most people will care at all.
No, because they'll say, well, his best record should be a lot better than that.
Yeah, easy schedule.
What would lead someone to believe that? Oh, because he said it when he took over, but the job changed.
NIL
completely changed his job.
Yeah.
Also, in addition to that, look at the history.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Dooley is lauded. Go look at his records each year. He wasn't great every year. Dick Crum had some really good teams for a while, then it tapered off.
Mm-hmm.
They stunk in the 50s and 60s. They were horrific. They were really good in the stretch in the 40s, but a big part of that was because they had guys named Weiner and Justice.
Exactly.
I mean, this is North Carolina football here.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm not saying be content, but I'm saying it helps to have perspective. So what will it take? I think it will take better perspective on program's history, what have been the high marks, and the fact that when North Carolina hits the high marks, it can never sustain it. It's hit a lot. It's bumped its head on the ceiling a lot.
Yeah.
Really in the early 70s, he had a couple of double-digit win teams. Crum in 80 and 81, they had top 10 finishes. Mac, I think when you go back in time, if Mac stays, if a certain someone doesn't screw up in a meeting in a hotel outside the Atlanta airport, if a certain someone just doesn't screw up and Mac stays at Carolina, I think in the climate of college football, what it was then, he would have won a national title or played and won at Carolina.
I probably agree with that, yeah.
He had it headed in that direction. His last two teams had the best defense in college football. Go look at what the NFL thought about that defense.
Mm-hmm.
In Carolina, football would look different now.
Mm-hmm.
Fans would feel different. Stadium would look different. They never would have had Butch's Blue Zone monstrosity. Sally would have built something over there.
Yeah, for sure.
Because she designs everything, and she's damn good at it.
Mm-hmm.
So he would have been the guy. He would have been the guy that did something at North that would have awakened the sleeping giant that Bobby Bowden used to talk about and kept it awake.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, North Carolina's just been hitting the snooze button for 100 years.
I know. It's a fascinating topic. We could sit here and talk about it all day. I mean, I want to hear from fans too. Reach out to us on Twitter, on our message boards if you're a premium subscriber. I'm just curious to what it would take if you're one of those people who's maybe kind of backed off a little bit and fell, not really on board with the regime and everything like that, despite them, winning 3 in a row. I'm just curious to hear because, again, I just find it a fascinating conversation that I'm actually genuinely curious about, which is why I brought it up on here. So, yeah, I mean, we definitely want to hear from you guys on that as the fans listening to this. So, AJ, let's move on to the BC preview. I want to run through it real quick. We got to talk about Boston College a little bit before we head out of here. But again, 5-5, 2-4 in ACC play. Noon kickoff this weekend in Chestnut Hill. Wins over Florida State, Duquesne, Michigan State, Western Kentucky, and Syracuse. Losses to 6th-ranked Missouri, UVA, and Virginia Tech. Both of those on the road, Louisville and 14th-ranked SMU. AJ, not a team on either side of the ball that's exceptionally great. It's somewhat similar to Wake Forest in some ways. Wake Forest, in my opinion, is a worse team than Boston College. But when you dive into kind of the ACC rankings of where it's a team that is kind of towards the bottom in most statistical kind of categories when it comes to big picture stuff on offense and defense. 14th offense in the ACC right now, number 13 scoring offense, number 16 passing offense, number 7 rushing offense. This is a team that prefers to pound the rock through the ground, then throw the ball. A lot of that has to do with the quarterbacks that they've had at the helm, Castellanos, before he decided that he didn't want to play football there anymore because he got benched. Now it's Grayson James. And Mac, I thought it was interesting because Mac talked about during his press conference this week, which I think is a great point by him under Bill O'Brien. I've got a fun fact about Bill O'Brien. Stay tuned for that. But Mac talked about earlier this week how he kind of sees it as, Bill O'Brien, an NFL guy, who's had a lot of coaching experience in the NFL, Houston Texans head coach, served under Bill Belichick for a long time. He's trying to implement a pro-style system at Boston College, but Castellanos doesn't really fit that when you look at him. He doesn't really fit that pro-style necessarily quarterback kind of thing, but Mac made a point of how Grayson James kind of fits that more. He's a guy that at that position, it makes a little bit more sense for what Bill O'Brien is ultimately trying to do at Boston College. And you dive into his stats, only played a few games, but completed 60% of his passes for 456 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's also got 2 rushing TDs. So hasn't lit up the stat sheet by any means, but it is a tricky kind of situation for him to kind of come into in the second half of the season and kind of been the starter because Castellanos was really good at times before things kind of fell off the ropes a little bit. So I say all that to say that this is a team that's going to pound the rock on the ground more than anything. 414 carries on the season versus 143 receptions for Boston College. I think that illustrates what they're going to be trying to do, and it's going to be trying to establish it through the ground. 4 different running backs with at least 250 yards. So it's definitely a better running team than it is a passing team. I don't think that's a really surprise for anybody, but it'll be interesting to see how it kind of plays out with Boston College over the next few years because I do think pro style is what they're ultimately looking to kind of get to. And then on the flip side, AJ, defensively, number 13 total defense, number 8 scoring defense in the league, number 8 rushing defense in the league, and number 12 passing defense. So, again, kind of in the middle of the pack on that defensive side of the ball in most stats. But they got to look out for, man. is Donovan Ezeraku. I mean, defensive end for him. He's one of the best players in the league, best player on Boston College, 4th in the ACC in tackles for loss with 14, 2nd in sacks in the league with 11. So based on how Carolina's offensive line played in that first half, they're going to have to play a lot better just to stop him on Saturday, because he's going to be definitely the number one guy and the number one threat for them on defense, because he's a really good player and having a really good season. I think he'll be playing at the next level very soon as well. So, AJ, again, winnable game, but it's a physical team. It's a team that has had some nice performances this year, beat some decent teams. And I think it's a team that if Carolina's not at their A game again, I think it's a team that they can definitely lose to on Saturday, especially with it being on the road. I don't think the crowd's going to play a massive factor. That you talked about that a little bit, but I do think that Carolina, I would rather play a team led by Grayson James than Castellanos, despite him not playing well at times this year. But again, Carolina's going to have to play well, and this kind of goes without saying. He can't just show up in any ACC game and play bad and win. But Carolina's going to have one of those complete performances again on Saturday to come with a win. I don't think you can play bad for a half and beat Boston College because of that physicality and because of how they play, unless they just play really badly. So I'm intrigued by this matchup. But again, when I dive in it on paper and I look at the stats and everything like that, I still chalk it down as an extremely winnable game for North Carolina if they continue to play like we've seen them play over the last few weeks in particular. Yeah,
at the same time, it's also very much a potential stub your toe game.
100%. 100%.
And that's why taking, I'm going to be very cliched here, dotting the I's and crossing the T's. If the Tar Heels dot the I's and cross the T's, they'll be halfway home in this game. Now, Grayson James is a pro-style quarterback. Bill O'Brien he was a head coach at Houston Texans for like 8 years. Mm-hmm. They run a pro style. That's one of the reasons Castellanos struggles, because he's not a pro style quarterback.
Doesn't fit as well.
This kid is. They put 28 up on SMU last week. They hung with them. Mm-hmm. There were times during that game where you would think SMU's about to put foot on throat, and didn't happen.
Didn't do it. Yeah.
SMU's really good. Mm-hmm. They're not a fluke. They're really good. And they could not fully shake BC in their own building. So I think I think BC is more. For weeks, I said if Castellanos doesn't play, Carolina has no problem with their winning. I'm changing my tune on that because Castellanos didn't fit in the end.
I agree.
This kid does more. And I think what's interesting is that Jeff Collins has challenged his defense this week, saying, hey, you guys want to play in the NFL? Well, you're going to play against an absolute NFL offense this week in terms of what they do, the way that they shift, the way they overload tight ends, the different things they do in pre-snap, the actual offense itself. So put good film out there of yourself playing against an NFL-style offense. That is how one of the ways he's challenging the defense this week, because I think he knows it can be very, very tricky going up there. I just think that, as I said before, give Omarion 35 to 40 touches and they're going to win.
Keep it simple, yeah.
Yeah. Don't stub your toe. Don't beat yourself, and give him a bunch of touches. And I think they can leave with one of those 27-20 type games, 23-17 type wins. I really believe that that's probably the way this thing's going to go. However, I also think that there's a chance that Carolina could win going away because BC lacks a lot of firepower.
Yeah.
And Bill O'Brien's still trying to work in a pro-style everything with a roster that wasn't constructed to do that as much. And let me give you a little side note about Bill O'Brien. He was the Penn State coach who took over after Joe Paterno left and then ultimately died. And this was after all the Sandusky stuff. And I was with Fox Sports at the time, and they had me cover Penn State's first game.
Oh, wow.
After all that, and that was at Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And Virginia beat them on a field goal, and that was a great atmosphere, and it was a really good game, and it was fascinating to see Penn State out there and a guy like Bill O'Brien with the headset on and the head coach instead of Paterno. You think about a guy that's got incredible confidence. You think about a guy that's got fascinating experiences. Bill O'Brien's the dude.
Yeah, good coach.
He was the Penn State coach after Paterno. You got to understand what it takes to say yes to that job.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes and spends 8 years as head coach of the Houston Texans. To revitalize himself, he spent 2 years as Nick Saban's offensive coordinator at Alabama, won a national title. So now he's at BC. He's from that area, and he's at BC, and he is a no-nonsense guy. He will win games at BC. They just need some NIL money like so many other programs. But he's a good coach. And Carolina will be as well scouted this weekend as they are in any game this year. And there will be in-game adjustments. The difference is Carolina has more talent than BC. Carolina is feeling really good about itself right now, better than BC probably is. And I think Carolina's coaching staff now is better at making in-game adjustments. When you've got Clyde Christensen down there on the sideline and Ted Monachino down there, and then you got guys like Kyle Fuller, who's helping out with the offensive line. And you've got Randy Clements, who's now on the sideline. And I'm not going to say healthy, but at least he's there all the time. Mm-hmm. You've got a group that actually makes some pretty good adjustments, more so than in the past. So I like that in Carolina going into this game. Carolina should win this game. I don't think it's going to be a huge margin, but it can be a pretty sizable margin. But I don't even know what I picked yet in our staff picks. But I'm looking at something like 24-17, 27-17, and Omarion goes for 150 plus.
I like that. I think I said 31-21. I'm firmly on.
I can't remember what I had. I do think Carolina can hold them to field goals. Well, field goals. They don't kick field goals, but you know what I mean. Yeah, they're going to stop them in the red zone a couple of times and keep them from scoring, and then get something on the other end. And I think that's how they push. If they do push the margin out, I think that's how it happens.
Agreed. I agree. I think I picked Carolina to win in this one, but I do think it's going to be a tough matchup. I do think, again, this is one of the games. This is probably the game out of the second half of the season. This is the game I had circled as that's the most losable game for me. And I still believe that even with Castellanos out, because I just think it's a tricky one going up there as well. So
maybe more so with him out.
Yeah,
there's a reason there's a reason they made the change.
Yeah, 100%.
He's not a pro style quarterback. He'll end up somewhere where they don't run the kind of offense Bill O'Brien runs.
No doubt.
Very, very different.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. Fun fact real quick, Age, about Bill O'Brien before we head out. I thought this was interesting. He spent 8 total seasons with Bill Belichick. He was with the Patriots a lot as like QB coach and wide receivers coach and stuff like that from 2007 to 2011, 2023 as well. And he spent a couple seasons with Nick Saban at Alabama, but never won a Super Bowl or a national title. I mean, what's the odds on that?
So they didn't win a national title when he was at Bama?
No.
I was just assuming they did.
Yeah, I was shocked.
I mean,
I saw that.
It's very few people do.
Oh, I know.
Very few people do. By the way, he was the one that got Jeff Collins hired first time at Georgia Tech in the late 90s. Mm-hmm. And Collins coached tight ends for 1 year. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, never played offense in his life, coached tight ends. And he said the other day that was one of the greatest experiences of his coaching career, because a lot of defensive coordinators have never coached on the offensive side. Mm-hmm. So he understood offensive intent and mindset because he had that first season at Georgia Tech, and Bill O'Brien was the guy that got him the job, and they're still close friends.
I find
that will be an embrace at some point during the practice before the game during warmups.
For sure. Oh, definitely. But I had to throw that in there because I was almost shocked when I saw that. I was like looking around.
I can't name you all the years Bama's won it because it's been so often. I just kind of
2020 was the last time Saban won it.
I assume that if you spend 2 years of Saban, you got some kind of brass.
And then to spend most, 6 seasons basically with Belichick and never win a Super Bowl was dominant. I just thought I was shocked when I saw that. I really was. Yeah, I really was.
Michael Coe asked a really good question the other day to Mac if he could see some Belichick in O'Brien. He said, yeah. I think some of the hard, ASSS stuff. I listened when I was driving in for a Carolina game early in the year. They were struggling at home with Western Kentucky because Castellanos was out that game, and they were really struggling. In fact, they were losing at halftime, and I don't remember verbatim what O'Brien said, but I'm listening to the radio broadcast, and the sideline reporter goes to talk to him at halftime, and they're losing to Western Carolina. And he said about 9 words and just walked off. And I'm like, man, that's going to be a fun locker room.
Yeah, no, I like him. I think he's a good coach, and he really, really good CV and pedigree. And I think he'll do a good job
up there. I think he's going to win up there.
I think he will too.
I think it's going to be a good program, and I think that this is his last stop.
Agreed.
He could be. Look, he's young enough. He's still 54, 55.
Yeah,
he could be there another 15 years and become legendary.
I agree. I wouldn't be surprised if he did it. I think it's a good hire for him. Yeah,
because when I was growing up watching college football, Boston College was good.
Oh,
They had full houses, and I remember seeing BC go win at Penn State, or excuse me, at Notre Dame. Was the week after Notre Dame beat Charlie Ward and Florida State when they were number 1. And there goes BC rolling in there, and BC would just bring 500 lunch pails with them, and they would knock your teeth out. And they would run the ball.
Yeah.
Except when they had Flutie Flakes. When they had Flutie Flakes, they would throw it too.
Yeah, Matt Ryan in there as well. They had a really good history, man. I mean,
any Carolina fan that's going up to that game, make sure you go out in front of the stadium that's near that little quad. That's where the Flutie statue is. It's awesome.
Yeah, you've told me it's pretty sweet. Yeah, a lot of history in that program, man. Again, it wouldn't mind seeing them being good again. And I know Carolina fans probably wouldn't mind it either, as long as Carolina beats them every year. So interesting matchup this weekend. I'm looking forward to it. But hey, just go ahead and head on out of here, man. A little bit longer show, but a lot of things
longer
to talk
than
about.
We anticipated by a considerable amount.
That's what happens when you have these conversations. I think we spent half the time trying to figure out what it would actually take. And I think, again, we could probably do multiple podcasts on it. And it's such an interesting question. So maybe that went a little bit longer than we thought it would. But again, these are organic conversations when we come on here. We don't do a lot of we don't really have a set rundown schedule. We have things we want to hit on, but we don't sit here for an hour trying to plan stuff out. So
it's quite
these
organic.
Conversations can just happen. So yeah. So AJ, let's get out of here. Got other stuff to do. And yeah, man, we'll be back again next week for another edition of the UNC Football Show. Keep it locked to charloillustrated.com, $8.33 a month. Links in the description below. Come on over and sign up. Be a premium member. You can also shoot us a Venmo at Heel Illustrated if you want to just support and don't sign up. We'd rather you sign up because you get a lot of perks for doing it. But if you want to do that, just to say thanks, it all goes back into running this business, paying staff, travel, so AJ can go to Boston and places like that. So all goes back into running this thing.
I will be in Boston. I'm not going to Hawaii for basketball. This time of year, I usually prioritize football over basketball. I did go to Mohegan Sun a couple years ago and missed the Wofford football game.
Yes, it's Wofford.
But I am not. We have a stringer in Honolulu, and we have a guy who covered for us in Bahamas last year. He'll be in Maui getting us stuff. But I will be in Boston this week in Chestnut Hill.
Yeah, action-packed Carolina weekend and even early next week with the Maui Invitational. So we'll do a basketball show as well, so stay tuned for that. That'll come out sometime around when this time comes out. So make sure you guys keep it locked for that. Subscribe, notification bell too, so every single time we upload, you'll be notified about stuff like that. And make sure you tell your friends about us too, and come on over and sign up, $8.33 a month, like I said earlier. We appreciate you guys watching. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. We'll see you next time. Thanks.